I do want to talk about the iPhone 14 as a whole. You've written about it. What do you think?
I think it's pretty interesting. I love the iPhone 14 Pro Max. This is the one that I use as a daily driver. It's big, it's, I think, beautiful, and it's got so much going for it. It's interesting when Apple doesn't change the design of its iPhone radically, people sometimes are disappointed because they think it should this have been the iPhone 14 or should it just have been the iPhone 13s? But actually, all the changes inside are quite dramatic, especially with the Pro model, which no longer has the cutout at the top. It now has a dynamic island, as they call it, a different shaped cutout at the top of the screen. But that has led to a new mechanism, a new mechanic to use the phone, which is radically different and very, very nice. As for the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Plus, well, they also have a lot going for them. I think the thing about the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Plus is that it's the early adopters, the really keen purchasers who buy as soon as an iPhone comes out. Whereas, and they tend to go for the iPhone 14 Pro, the iPhone 14 Pro Max this year. But that doesn't mean that because the iPhone 14 hasn't had quite such stellar sales yet, that it's anything less than successful. These are more likely to be bought by people who are waiting for their contract to expire, who are waiting for the time that they need to buy an iPhone because the last one breaks or they lose it or whatever, rather than being the people who want to be there on day one to get the brandest, newest model.
Can you expand more on the features or the new features that these iPhones have?
Sure. Um, Across the iPhone 14 series, there are several very cool safety features, both of which are now live in the States. One of them is due to go live elsewhere in the world in the next few days. And the first of those is crash detection. And it means that let's hope none of us ever have to witness this or put it to the test. But the idea is that if you're in a car crash and you don't respond quickly, I think, in a matter of seconds, the iPhone is so sensitive now to high G forces that it recognizes that this is what has happened and it can contact emergency services and even give your exact location. Um, it's only been out since September, but there have already been cases of people whose lives have potentially been saved by this. Certainly, they've been reported to emergency services more quickly because they were incapacitated, couldn't pick up the phone, but the phone has done it for them. That's pretty cool. The second thing is emergency messaging, emergency SOS by text by satellite, and which slightly blows my mind, even though I've had it explained in great detail. The idea is that if you're out of a cellular coverage area and you get into difficulties, and there was a case in Alaska just in the last few days of a guy on a snow machine who got into difficulties, and there was no way that his phone service was going to pick it up, then you have the option to make an SOS text message through satellite. It's quite cool. The little bit at the top of the screen, which usually shows how many bars you've got, well, obviously there'd be no bars at all because there's no coverage, but it's replaced by a cute little picture of a satellite. Now, if you get that and you're outdoors, obviously you need an unobstructed view of the sky, then you can connect your iPhone 14, 14 Plus, 14 Pro, and 14 Pro Max to a satellite to send simple emergency messages. You have to be pointing at the satellite, unless your eyesight is much better than mine, Brittany. I can't see them, but there is software in the iPhone that enables you to know exactly where you should be pointing your handset, and it can send and receive these messages. And those are, I think, the real marquee features. The iPhone 14 Pro has a significant upgrade in its cameras. The Previously there were three 12 megapixel cameras on an iPhone 13 Pro, There's now two 12 megapixel cameras and a 48 megapixel camera, which means that even in the lowest light, it can combine individual pixel sites to create a decent quality image, even if the light is against you. Those are some of the headline features on the new phones.
That's really incredible that these features can potentially save a life. So, what has the response been to the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Pro Max from both regular consumers and the tech experts?
I think it's been pretty positive from both. As a tech writer, I've certainly been, blown away by the way they are doing these things. What is remarkable, it's not the first satellite phone, obviously, but the fact that you can have satellite connectivity in a thin, light machine that is not noticeably heavier than last year's model, but suddenly has this extra satellite connectivity capability is remarkable. And what's interesting is when these features were announced, there was a lot of skepticism about them, saying no one's ever going to use them. We're always in contact with regular cell service. We're rarely in crashes, thank God. But actually, the stories already have made it clear that these things are really going to save lives.
And how do you think it stacks up to last year's model specifically?
I think what's interesting is the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max are now significantly ahead of the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus. Not least, they've got a whole new processor that's very, very fast, whereas the iPhone 14 and iPhone 14 Plus have got a version of the processor that was used in the iPhone 13 series. And there is a school of thought that says, you don't need the iPhone 14. You could just buy the iPhone 13 or the iPhone 13 mini, both of which are still on sale, because the processor is almost the same. You don't get crash detection, you don't get satellite connectivity, and you also don't get the latest camera. The iPhone 14 doesn't have a 48 megapixel camera, but it does have an upgraded main camera as well. But it is certainly true that if you wanted to save money, the iPhone 13 is still a heck of a phone, and it's easier to get hold of, it's cheaper, and it does give the iPhone 14 a run for its money.
Can the everyday user really tell the difference between the cameras?
I think that's a really good question. But actually, yes, I think so. In fact, I was looking at pictures taken on the iPhone 14 Pro, not mine, a friend's, and I was slightly blown away by how rich and detailed they were. Last year's were great, but this year's pictures look even better. The thing about Apple photography, it's not that their sensors are higher resolution than their rivals. That's not the case at all. But they have in their photography engineers people with amazingly good taste. So, and that really pays dividends. When they came out with their night mode, I talked to one of the main guys there, and he said, we're not trying to make night look like daytime. We're trying to take a photograph that when you look at it, it captures your memory of what it was like to be there at the time, because our eyes and our imagination help us to see a little bit better than the way a camera can. So if you can boost that but not make it look unreal, then you're onto something, I think.